Today we'll talk about Expressjs, which is a library we use to build an HTTP server using Node.js. It's the final step to glue the front end with the back end. So far we did HTML, CSS, JavaScript. On the front end, we learned how to use the React library to build user interfaces. Then we venture into SQL to build a database. We got some tables to store the data for the app. Now we gotta figure out how to hook them all up together, and that's the final piece. We're gonna have a middleman acting between the front end and the database, and we're gonna build that using JavaScript as well, because Node.js is nothing less than JavaScript programming language, it's just a different name. It just so happens that JavaScript in the beginning was just constrained to the browser. And then somebody had the idea of taking that out. Why not use JavaScript outside the browser for general things, the same way other programming languages are used? So Node.js was born. So don't be scared of the name. It's just a name, but it's basically just JavaScript server side. So you're gonna need Node.js. This is the website if you download. And the library is Express, and we download that using npm, the Node package manager. But yeah, for now, if you recall what we had, let me power up the app first. What we had, github.com. This is the repository that we have been working on. You can see the SQL statements we did yesterday are here. Basically, there's a web client directory where we have the React application. So if we go and power that up first, you cd to web client in the terminal, and then you run npm space start, and you got this. Notice it's port 3000. Keep that in mind because the server has to run on a different port. Okay, we got the front end running, so we can access that. Let me see if I can bring it up. Uh, this is the front end. If you click /messages, this is what we've been building, and we're going to build a backend for this. So far, we only have a fake backend that's loading these messages, and we have no way of persisting them. And if we refresh, they're all gone. That's what we're going to build now to persist those. Okay, if you refresh your memory as well about the database with pgadmin, we have a database, full stack DB2, schemas public, and we got a table here for messages and one for users. If you look at messages, here are the columns. We already had some data. View added data, all rows. And you can see each row is a different message with a comment by somebody. Okay, now let's build the server. Back to the repository, under the root, I create a new folder called its server to better organize what we've been doing. So we're going to create a new file there. It's called index.js. Now notice the .js extension because this is going to be a JavaScript file. And then here, what you're going to do is, okay, before we do anything, we need to download a third-party package that is Express, and then we're going to need also the driver for to access the database for Postgres. But those the code for that, it's already written by somebody else. We don't have to write it from scratch. And to kind of download the code that somebody else wrote, we use npm, the Node package manager. So before we do anything, we need to make this server directory an npm project. The same way we did web client, we have a package.json there with dependencies. We can do the same way. So basically, let me open a new terminal window here. I'm going to choose command prompt. I have two, by the way. I have one for the web client, and then I'll have one for the server. I'm going to cd to server, and I'm going to npm init. That basically creates a package.json, so we don't have to do it manually. I'm going to enter everything. I don't care. Can change those later. Yes, and then we create a package.json here under server directory. Then we can install packages, npm install. We're going to need Express, and we're going to need PG. Express is for the HTTP web server. PG is for the database driver. Now that we got them here, see under dependencies, and if you check node modules, I know I didn't talk much about Node.js. So basically, whenever you install npm, it's going to install under node modules. So you're going to see Express directory here. With the source code, you can see the actual code for Express. It's here like that. Anyway, also the same for PG, and all of their dependencies are here. Anyway, we got that. So we're going to go back to index. Now, finally, we can require. So the way you do, if you want to pull third-party code in Node.js, by default, we use what's called common JS pattern, which is different from the import that you've been seeing with React. So here we're going to say express, and let me disable my copilot because that's not good for us as beginners. And I might have to refresh one moment, reload window. Hope you can see it again. Going back, so basically we require the name of the module as the same name that we have in package.json. If I put on the side here, the same name here has to match there. And then we can put that in a variable like const to define a variable in JavaScript. And I usually call the same name as the module within the quotes. And then you can call that as a function to create what's an app. So this is a function call, and that returns you something. And that something is usually, it's an application, and we usually call it app or app. So put that in a variable. And then we can ask the app to listen. So app.listen. And you can call it as a function like that. But it needs a port. So if you hover over this, usually Visual Studio Code will tell you what the arguments are. So basically we need a port here. Let me put in a variable, const port. And notice we cannot do 3000 because it's already taken by the front end. So we should do something like 3001 or another one that's not 3000. And then this should create a basic HTTP server. If you do, to run the JavaScript file here, basically you just do node space the file name, index.js. And notice nothing's happening, but it's actually happening. You don't see the prompt again like this. So it's running. So basically you can go to the browser and try accessing localhost colon 3001. And you should see cannot get slash. That means it's running. And the message is just saying, hey, I don't recognize this endpoint because we haven't defined that. Okay, if you want to inspect that with the dev tools, click network tab, same as Chrome. Make sure click all, filter, and you can see there's a 404, whatever. And there's a response header. You should see. Let me see if you have powered by Express somewhere. Usually there's a powered by Express. Response, get, whatever. Yeah, I don't know why there's no power by, but usually there is. Anyway, should see any of the other ones. Okay, so going back there, this is not nice. So basically what we do is we want to get some feedback when we run it. So we add a second argument to listen. So this function takes the first argument apart. The second we can pass an actual function. That will be run when we power this up. And we can pretty much print a message with console log to the console. And I usually say with backtick, by the way, so I can interpolate the port later. Server is running at http colon / localhost colon to interpolate dollar curly brace the port. Basically, the value of port here goes into that. If you have a question, post in the chat, okay? All right, so that value will go here. So imagine that will go here like that. But in order for that to work, you have to use the backtick like this. We cannot do single or double quotes. All right. Anyway, so going back here, just wanna But the person who came later, that's the repository we've been using. So if you want to follow along, this is the repository. You have the web client directory. You have to cd to that, npm install, and then npm start. And then once you got that, go out to a new terminal window and then create a new folder called server. And then you create index.js like this. But before, you should do npm init and then npm install express and pg. All right. Why do we have to write a function in the listen? Because we want some feedback when we run the server. Right now, when we run without that, you see nothing's happening. So you might be confused what's going on. So we write that here so that when we kill the server, we control C, by the way, control C, and try it again. So every time you change the code, make sure to control C and restart it. Every time you change the code, restart it. Don't forget. And you now see that there is some feedback there. Server is running at that, and I can control and click it to follow that. Very nice. All right, so that's more convenient for us. Anyway, with that in place, let's learn how we can build an endpoint or a route to serve a resource. So basically, the server is just acting as a middleman. So it waits for requests, it's listening. If anybody comes along, they will ask for a resource, and the server will see if they can serve them, right? Usually, it would first authenticate the person. Hey, is this person signed into our system? And then is the person authorized to do what they're trying to do? And then finally, they can either, along the way, they can either reject the person, hey, you're not allowed to do this. You don't have permission, or they are granted. But anyway, that's a little bit too complex for what we have right now. So let's do just a simple thing. So what we're gonna do is just do a very simple route for a GET request. So a GET, if you HTTP hypertext transfer protocol is the way we usually communicate from the client to the server. And when you go in the browser, type an address, enter, that's actually making an HTTP request, and it's a GET request, okay? So how do we build a way to handle a GET request? Basically say app.get. The get is the method, and then you call this as a function. And this function here requires two things. First is the path. So, okay, where's this resource going to be at? Let's say slash messages. When somebody comes in, they go to localhost 3001, right? Slash messages, then it's going to hit this get here. Now we got to do some instructions. What we're going to do when we get that kind of request, get messages. Well, we got to pass second argument. That's a function. So we have a set of instructions to execute, and then ultimately going to reply with a response. Now this function takes two arguments, rec and res, separated by a comma. The first is just request. The second is a response. If you want to spell them out, that's fine. It doesn't matter. Okay. Now what we do here is typically we do some processing, whatever, try to look up in the database, the messages, and ultimately we're going to send back a response. And the way you can do that is with res. You call on the res object and dot send function like this, and you can pass whatever there. For example, if it's just a plain string, you can say hello there. And then going back, by the way, you got to restart, right? Control C, do it again. Going back to the browser, let's see what we got. We're here 3001 slash messages. This is a GET request. I see hello there. If you want to inspect, try again with the DevTools open, network tab, filter all. You should be able to see a 200 for slash messages on the localhost 3001. Yeah, like I told you, I was trying to show you this X powered by header. The response is like saying, hey, we were powered by Express. Anyway, the response is just this plain text like that. And I think, let me see, the response content type is HTML, text HTML with a carousel 2F. 8. Okay. So far, so good. Let me know if you're having trouble. Well, you need something. Okay. Great. By the way, you might also see people using .json. Same thing. If you do JSON, like object. So the send will recognize whatever. If you try to pass an object like this, object name, hello, it will recognize that and pass it. By the way, you gotta close the server, restart. Going back here, if I say refresh, you should see a response, hello, and this is Firefox live preview, but it's basically this. Make it bigger for you. Response, basically raw, it's JSON. Okay, so basically this is what we're gonna build. It is a server that when asked for a resource, we're gonna reply with some JSON. Okay, so text in the format JSON. Uh, the traditional old days, people used to send back HTML and just server-side render everything, but we're separating backend and front end, and the front end is building itself. Remember, when we have a React application, a single-page application, everything is constructed in the front end, the document, and then when we change pages, it's actually just rebuilding and manipulating the document to look like something else, which is a different quote page. And all this front end is going to do is request data from the backend in the JSON format. Of course, it does HTTP request and then receives that data in the body of the request, the response in JSON. That's you might hear the term. It's a backend API JSON format, that kind of stuff. It's basically what we're doing. RESTful, by the way, too. You're gonna hear RESTful. RESTful is just a way, basically, to name your paths. And usually we name it like this with the resource name. For example, if I want to get all the messages, I would name it with /messages. And then if you want to create a message, that would be post that we're going to do later, post/messages, and so on. It's basically, in its simplest form, is just the naming that we choose. Of course, we're going to choose, hey, there, whatever. And this is not RESTful at all, right? And the way they do that is so that if you want to get a specific message, you could add another endpoint like get/messages/123 for the message ID. So you see, it's like a hierarchy. Okay, we're going through message resource. And if you want a specific one, slash the ID of that. Anyway, let's learn how to connect to the database. So we're going to need the PG module. So you go up there, require PG, and then put in a var const PG equals. By the way, let's compare again with the front end, web client, source, app. If you notice the front end, we use import, right? From, because this is like the new way of doing this, it's called ES modules, ECMAScript modules. And whereas the Node.js way is common.js, which is what they require. So people are trying to move towards this one, the import, but still Node.js is behind. And it's kind of hard to work. Usually we have worked with both of them. And yeah, that's not an easy thing because in web development, they try to support the previous stuff as much as they can. So anyway, you can look that up yourself. ESM versus common.js. So when you're backend here, remember require with the const variable. When your front end is import whatever from. Okay. Anyway, so PG. So what we're gonna do here, I think we can do a new. So PG dot client. We can create an object from this, and to create an object, usually in JavaScript, traditionally, you could define a function that would be a blueprint for an object, which is basically in object-oriented programming is a class that builds many objects. And usually you would say new before that. Okay, so you can create a new instance of a client with new pg.client, and then you can pass some options as an object like that. And here we're gonna say, okay, what is the database? Full underscore stack db2 that I'm using. What is the user? Full stack user2, I think. And what's the password? Don't copy, please. And yeah, and this one should return the client itself, so I can put in a variable, PG client or whatever you want to call it. And that way we can use it. And then finally we got to connect with PG client.connect like this. But before I move on, I just want to go back to PG admin to show you why I put these values here, right? If you're not aware. In the last lesson, we went and first created a user here, right? We right click, create login group, full stack user. In my case, I user two because I already had the other one. And then I created a database, full stack db2 separated by a underscore. Okay, so that's why. And I set a password on that. Anyway, I take that and can pass as this configuration object here to the PG client. PG is just basically we have the database server running, Postgres, right? You should have Postgres running in your computer. And how can we connect to that and execute queries from JavaScript or Node.js? Well, we would have to write code to implement all of that by ourselves, but we don't want to reinvent the wheel. So what we're going to do is leverage the work somebody already did in order to accomplish that. So it just so happens that in the npm registry, right, let's go npm.js.com. This is where we download code that somebody else wrote, libraries. And we can find a Postgres one that's PG. You can see it's a Postgres client. And this one has some code, right? If you go to their source code, it's open source. This is where all the code is. But basically, this allows us to connect to the database and execute queries. And it was written by somebody else, so we don't have to spend all the time writing it ourselves. Anyway, we pull that into our project by npm install pg in the terminal, if you recall. I don't know if we have it here somewhere. Oh, there we go, here. I installed PG, and that should install under node modules, PG, and the code is there. So in order for us to include that code, that functionality, we do require here. And that way we can have access to that driver, right? It's a client. And when we do a new client here, create this new object that we can use to connect and ultimately execute queries. I hope that makes sense. All right, but this one, connect, actually returns a promise if you hover over it. So usually when we have a promise, you want to ensure first it executes and it connects. Usually can do a then, and then I'm going to do something else with this callback function. So ideally, you want to move this everywhere there inside, like this. Oops, like that. Now, if you don't like that nesting, you can do the following. Let me show you. You can use async await. So basically, you can do await, the keyword here. So basically, that would wait for the promise here have the promise, and when it's returns a value, hey, okay, I'm okay, I connected. It would go on and execute the code after that. Now to do this, I need to have a sync function underlying it. So if I try to run it, it's going to complain, await is only valid in async functions. So we got to wrap this whole thing in a async function. Let's call it setup app. And you could put it there. But then you would have to move this here as well. Oops, messed up my keys. You know how you work on Mac, you press command? I just did that. instead of control because I'm on Windows right now. Anyway, I hope you can still see it. So you move everything here, there, fix the indentation. And then because it's a function definition, it won't call itself, so you got to call it outside like that. All of that just to have a sync function and be able to use await. Of course, you can better organize all this stuff. Usually we would move all these route definitions to a separate file and all that stuff. So it'd be very clean. But anyway, let's see if it's working. If you don't get any errors, I think it works. What did I miss? 26. Let's read the error, by the way. If you don't know how to debug, read where the file is, index. Okay, line, colon, line 26. Line 26. I'm missing what? The closing parentheses here. Like that. And it shouldn't be that one. There you go. Fix that. Okay. Try Node again. It should have no problems. Connecting. If you see an error, that means something's wrong. Okay, ready to make a query? Okay. So let's go back to this endpoint for slash messages. Remember, when the user makes a request from the client, get HTTP colon slash slash localhost colon 3001 slash messages. We're gonna hit this function, meaning we're gonna execute from the top to the bottom of the body. So first, we usually do query, right? Ask the database. Database, please give me all the messages. Then you take that and reply res send that. Okay, so how to make a query? Well, call the PG client. PG client, hey, has a function called .query, and it can pass the query as the argument string here. So what's the query to? We got the table messages. We want to select all the columns from messages. What's the query? Select star from messages, just like we did in the previous lesson. Semicolon if you want. Now, if you do this, it returns a promise. By the way, you can VS Code usually if you hover over it, it will try to give you the types. And the way I read this is you gotta know here, see this parentheses. After the parentheses, there's a colon, which is meaning this function returns a promise of this following type. But all I care about is that's returning a promise. Remember, we did promise when we did the front end, if you recall. In the front end, we did messages.js, where we did fetch, right? Fetch returns a promise, and response.json returns a promise. So we always need .then, right? To do something after the promise is fulfilled, right? Because to call on the database for data takes time. So it's promising you, hey, I'm going to give you something back, but please wait. But because the nature of JavaScript is asynchronous, if you were this, the program doesn't like hang here. It keeps going. Basically, this is executed and it's going to go there and eventually find something. But it's going to keep going despite that. It's going to send a response right away if I don't do anything about waiting for this first. So usually what I could do is, okay, I only want to send when this promise fulfills, but to do that, I got to put a .then here, call this function after it's been fulfilled. That is, I got the data from the database. Then you got to move the rest send inside there, like that. And that's how you handle a promise. Now, I'm obviously not going to send hello here. I think this function is going to give us rows, and then we can send back the rows. I think that should be okay. It's an array of objects, if I recall. Let's test it out. Kill the server, restart. Browser. Go back here, refresh. There you go. Let's see what's going on. We might have messed up. Uh-oh. We messed up. We sent back the whole result. It's not rows. So let me show you the raw. This is the raw. Basically, what the callback function gets is the whole results from this query, and inside that we got rows here. That's what we actually want, right? See, it's an array of objects. Anyway, let's fix that. So here it's not really rows, it's just results, result, and then we get it's an object that has rows, so I can say result dot rows like that, just to get the rows. Remember, kill the server and do it again. And if I refresh, there you go. You can see now. This is the raw, by the way, just a one-liner with a text format in format JSON. So Firefox has this feature where it makes a live document to make it nicer for us to visualize. So basically, it's an array of objects. And you can see each object represents the row in the database, and each property is the column. All right, so we got all of them here. What would it look like in Chrome? If you ask Chrome users, Chrome base, Edge people, let's see. There you go. Looks like this. So I can click pretty print. It's a function from Chrome that adds some indentation and spaces to help us visualize what's going on. If I click network, let's see if it has the live document view. I'll click all here. So this is what it looks like in Chrome in the response. Yeah, it looks a little better, but yeah, it has the live preview as well, like Firefox. Anyway, we got the data in the endpoint. So going back to VS Code, let me teach you something about not having to ever have to kill the server and restart again. Nodemon, you ever heard, probably have used it. So let's install that, npm install --save -dev nodemon. The reason I use --save dev is to separate this dependency from the dev dependencies with the dev dependencies that you're going to see. Basically, the package.json for server now has a section called dev dependencies, nodemon there. Now, the reason I have it separate is because people like to separate what's needed for production versus what's needed only for development. And nodemon is something that, as a tool for us to develop and not necessarily for production. In production, we don't want to be restarting the app all the time. That's why people separate, but strictly you don't have to, you know. You could have put nodemon under dependencies. It would work the same way. Okay, now we got to do the following. Okay, nodemon was installing node modules, and it adds a command in .bin as well. And this one, in my case, is windows.cmd, and Mac Linux is the other one. It's basically a command to call nodemon.js here under the nodemon folder that was installed. Where is it? MNOP. Nodemon bin. See the command here? This is basically nodemon code that's executing. Anyway, I can type /node modules .bin and then nodemon and then my file name, and it will call nodemon. If you don't want to type this whole path, you just type npx nodemon index.js. And there you go. Nodemon will listen to changes. So let me show you what's going to happen. If I go to index and I add a comment, hello, save it, you see what it did? Restarting due to changes automatically restarts it for us. All right. Now, if you ever forget that, you want to add that as an npm script. So let's do that. Package.json under scripts. You're going to add, let's add a dev script here, for example. So when we run npm run dev, it will run the following command, and that's going to be nodemon index.js. You don't need to have the npx here. So that way, whenever I need to start my development, I just say npm run dev, and that in turn will call nodemon. You see here, nodemon index.js. So that way you don't have to remember that's nodemon that's executing, or if you ever need to change from nodemon to something else, you would just change it here in the script, and people will still use npm run dev without any change. Okay, enough of that. We got messages. Let's see how the front end will handle this. Let's go back. Web client, source, pages, messages.js. We got here the component. Remember, we got a React component, messages, and if I fold this because I don't care right now, there's a use effect. Remember, the component is a function that returns some sort of template that looks like HTML, but it's actually called JSX, which is syntactic sugar for JavaScript function calls to React.createElement. And after that's been rendered, that means the function was called, the document was updated for the user. It's going to call the function from useEffect. Because there's an empty array, it's only called once after the first render and no more. Otherwise, it would be running after every render. And that call is calling fetch to retrieve data, right? It's going to make a get by default HTTP request to some server here. This one that we use, it's fake one. We don't want to do that anymore. Now we got our own. So we're going to do HTTP : localhost 3001/messages. If you recall, that's the endpoint we just built to retrieve messages from the database, the table of messages. Make sure it's HTTP, not S, okay? If you make that mistake, like I did before, putting an S there, it's not going to work. And that's it. I don't think you have to change anything else except, let me see, maybe this part here. Right now, if you recall, our table, if I put the table here, definition on the side or up, let me see, put it on the side. This is definition for messages table. We got ID, comment, created ad, author. Notice here we're expecting what for messages. If I scroll all the way down, where we create the div with the messages, we do message.comment, so that's fine. We got ID as well. Okay, so I think this one has to change because I think we had to do this because the fake backend didn't have the comment column. So I don't think we need that anymore, actually. We remove that. So let me make sure I'm doing the right, I think this one, right? Yeah. So posts already in the right format that we expect. So now let's try it out. Remember, node mode is running here, and whatever change we make on the back end is right there, but the front end is also being listened to because we got a development server running. So let's see, let me use Chrome, localhost 3000, go to messages. Oh no, we got a problem. What is it? Let me see what's going on. We got a CORS problem. I can click on the console in the DevTools. Access to fetch messages from origin has been blocked. No access, whatever. Basically, that's the problem with cross-origin resource sharing that you might encounter a lot when you start new projects. That's because it's basically it wouldn't give you this problem if I had like the same domain. Like here we have localhost 3000, the other one is 3001. If I had the same kind of, obviously we're not using actual domains like hello.com, but basically they would have to be hello.com on the server and the front end to make this work. Because right now it's the only same origin policy. If you want to read more about that, here's a resource. It's kind of annoying, but it's a way to protect from stuff. But basically, when we want to allow cross origin, the way we do that is on the server side, right? Our server has to send this header, access control allow origin. And basically, if you want to just allow one origin, that's our front end, you would specify the URL to that front end. If you want to allow everything, it's a star. So pretty much any website can call. Okay, so let's fix that easily with a module here. Basically, you can set the header if you want. Let me see if I can show you the manual way, and then I'll show you the middleware way. The manual way is go to index.js, and this is the endpoint, the function to handle that. Pretty much before we send anything, we have to set a header. It could be either before this or inside here, doesn't matter. To set a header, HTTP header, REST, you can use set, I think, or set header, either one, like this, and you can give the name that they required, access control, allow origin like this, and you could put star if you want anything to be allowed. Let's try to see if it's working. You see the messages there. Basically, if you inspect network, all, and let's refresh here. Uh, Actually, this one is front end, so let me go to XHR because that's XML HTTP request, which is what fetch is doing. Let's inspect this one, click headers. We want to verify that the response sent by the server has some headers. This one, see that one? We set that one to star, which means, hey, we allow the origin, any origin. If you want to whitelist that, you would do basically here you would, I think if you put localhost 3000, which is the front end, right? To only allow that one. You put it there. And let me see if it's still working. Yeah, it's still working, right? No problem. See the messages here. And if I look at network, this one, I want to check the header for the response. It's still here with the specific one. Okay, so yeah, but so here basically you would have to do it for every single response to make it work. So that's kind of annoying, right? So what we do is we use a middleware. A middleware in Express is something that's put in between the request and the response that's to be sent. So it's basically, think of it as a pipeline. Water is flowing, and then ultimately it reaches the function here where you send back a response. But how can we always make sure to intercept the requests that are coming, all of them, and then make sure to set this header, and then that way every single response will have it. Let's go up here after we do app, and to add a middleware, you say app.use, and then you pass a function that has rec, res, and next, 3 parameters. So basically what's going to happen is every time you get a request, it's going to pass through this function here, and it won't only let it through to this other one, for example, if you call next. That's the function you call, hey, okay, you can go on to the next thing. Okay, so what we're going to do here there is move this here so that every single response will have this header set. So we get a request, pass through the middleware, set the header access control to this, and then go on to the next thing, which is basically this function here. And if there was another endpoint, it would be that other function, so on and so on. Okay. Now, if you don't want to do this yourself, there's a module called cores, so you can install that. Let's go to the terminal. npm install cores, CORS, and then you would require here const cores, and basically instead of this function, you call cores like this. So when you call cores, it's basically returning a function just like we had, like this. That's doing a lot of extra stuff. Okay, it's basically that's what it's doing. It returns a function definition for the middleware. And I think by default, it's going to be star. So if you were to change it, I think you got to change to origin to be HTTP, localhost 3000, if I'm not mistaken. Let me comment this out and show you. Without, right? Let me put npm run dev. Go to the browser. I think that should do it. Network. By the way, I don't think I even need, let's see. What's going on? It's running here. There you go. It's star right now. Still there. Star. And if I change with origin as the object there, redundant mode restarted. Refresh. Look it again. Now it's localhost 3000. Okay. So that's how you change through the middleware cores. Okay. So I think it's time for us to take a break. And I'll see you on the next one.